So before I get started, I just wanted to let everyone know about the SSW Rewards app. If you want to go ahead and scan that QR code, you can download our app, and every talk that we present, you can score your SSW points, which you can redeem for some cool prizes. The good thing about everyone watching this online is you'll be able to pause on that frame, so I won't linger too long. So, as Adam mentioned, my talk tonight is called Power Apps, the Tesla of app development. And you're probably thinking, why have I named it that? Clickbait. I think there's actually a very good reason to call it that, and we'll get to that in a minute. But before I start, I want to know who here has heard of Power Apps before. And if you're watching online, just type, yes, I've heard of it in the comments. Okay? And who here has actually used it before? Okay? And if you're watching online again, type, I've used it in the comments. And who here has never heard of it before? All right, we got one. Microsoft marketing department isn't doing their job. So that is good to know. What I want to give you tonight, I think I'm going to give you something no matter where you answered to those questions. If you don't know anything about Power Apps, I'm going to give you an introduction to what you can do with Power Apps, with maybe some ideas of where you could implement it in your business. If you have heard of it before, hopefully I'll kind of extend your knowledge and maybe work towards a more complete solution. And if you are even an expert using Power Apps, maybe there's a few tips or tricks that you can pick up as well. So, why have I called it the Tesla of app development? Well, if you've ever seen a drag race between a Lamborghini and a Tesla, and if you're watching this later, you can pause here and go search it. But basically, the Tesla is going to, as soon as they say go, the Tesla is going to shoot out to the front, and then the Lamborghini is going to kind of claw back space as the race goes on, eventually draw level, and eventually overtake it. So basically, if it's a short race, the Tesla wins. If it's a long race, the Lamborghini wins. And I think that's a really good metaphor for developing with Power Apps, because as soon as you start developing with Power Apps, all of the kind of out-of-the-box features that you're building on top of are going to give you a huge head start. But eventually, the traditional development platform, in other words, the Lamborghini, is going to catch up. And I'll get to some of the specifics about that later on in this talk. The other reason why it's a good metaphor is if you don't realize the Tesla is actually a lot cheaper than the Lamborghini. And the same thing applies to software development. So if you're developing with Power Apps, well, if you're doing any development really, you'll know that often the biggest expense, at least up front, is going to be actually the time spent developing. So if you can have a solution that can save you a lot of time up front, you're going to save a lot of money, even though it might cost a bit more in licensing later on. But again, we'll cover that as well. So let's move on to the contents of tonight's talk. So first, I'm going to cover a quick history of low-code solutions. Then I'm going to introduce a scenario, Bob the real estate agent. Names have been changed to protect the innocent. Then I'm going to do an unboxing of Power Apps and show you what you actually get out of the box. Then we're going to cover the pricing of Power Apps, probably the most important part for any business people out there. Then I'm going to compare a Power App solution to a dev solution. And then I'm going to show you the best of both worlds. So, firstly, let me introduce myself. My name's Calum Simpson. I'm a Senior Software Architect here at SSW. I've got years of experience with traditional development and also low and no-code solutions. So when I first started developing, I considered myself a bit of a skeptic of the low-code solutions in general. So, I thought, well, I'm a perfectly good developer. What do I need low-code solution for? It's probably just developing with training wheels on. There's probably some sort of constraint to what I can actually do with it. It's probably not worth whatever the licensing costs or whatever are. But I have to say, recently I've been doing a lot of cool projects for SSW, in Power Apps specifically. More and more stuff, kind of consulting more about business rather than just strictly technology. And I have to say I've really kind of changed my mind or updated my opinion on what I think about low-code solutions. I think one of the most important things I want to tell you if you are a developer is the main advantage of Power Apps is not the fact that you don't need to know how to program in order to use it. The main advantage is actually how quickly you can get your project up and running. A little bit more about me. I'm actually a hotel reviewer on YouTube, which you probably already know if you're one of my dozens of subscribers. And also my personal pronouns are he, him, in case you're wondering. And if you do have the SSW app, you can go ahead and scan that QR code there and you'll get some bonus points. Now, one of the other things about me is I've always got some sort of idea up and running, if it's a business idea or some other thing. And here's one of my cool projects that I've been working on recently. I've got to press play. So this is a table that I bought from IKEA, and I put LED lights in it, and it does all sorts of patterns. Fortunately, it's not playing, but anyway, move on. So let me jump into it. Here's the history of low-code solutions. So in 1992, that's where I'm starting my timeline. We had Access as a low-code solution. The problem with Access was it was kind of tied to a specific version of Office, and it wasn't web-based. So we all kind of moved to Visual Basic instead. Then in the year 2000, we had data access pages, but that was basically just a big fat ActiveX control, and it wasn't very extensible. So we moved to ASP.NET. Then in 2009, we had XRM from the Dynamics team. So if you're not aware, XRM, it stands for, it's CRM, as in Customer Relationship Management, but for X, as in for whatever you want. So it's basically an extensible CRM. The problem with that, though, was kind of the licensing and stuff like that. So then in 2011, we had LightSwitch from Microsoft. The problem with LightSwitch was kind of, at the time, the trends were moving towards more mobile and cloud-based development, and LightSwitch didn't really support that very well. In 2014, we had OutSystems. OutSystems was actually founded in 2001 in Portugal, but this is when they released their first free offering. And the thing I like about OutSystems' free offering is it's a lot more generous than all of the other low-code platforms that are out there. The problem that I will say with it, though, is that once you do start paying for it, as in once your usage exceeds the free tier, so to speak, it's a lot more expensive. Okay? And also, it's a lot harder to swap out custom pieces. And that's going to be one of the big advantages of Power Apps that I'll get to shortly. So in 2016, we had the first mention of Power Apps from Microsoft. They kind of turned off the light switch, so to speak, and started Power Apps. Now, when it first was introduced, it was quite a different beast to what it is now. It was a lot simpler. I'll get to that in a minute. In 2018, we had the Lightning platform from Salesforce. Now, the thing about the Lightning platform compared to Power Apps, it's a lot more expensive in terms of a per-user license basis. But I will say if you are already using Salesforce as your CRM, it probably does make sense to use the Lightning platform for your low-code development as well. Then finally in 2020, we had Amazon entering the ring as well with Honeycode. So Honeycode at this stage, it's still a very new product. It's a very simple product. It's definitely a very cheap product. So I mean, if you are looking for something very basic, very quick, maybe a little hobby kind of shop or something like that, it's probably for you. But I think we will watch this space because I think we'll see it kind of expand in the coming years. So here's our Gartner Magic Quadrant for enterprise low-code application platforms. So this was in 2017, and something you'll notice about this chart here is that there's no Microsoft on it. So in 2017, Power Apps wasn't really considered one of the major players, but Microsoft has really been investing a lot of time and money into improving their low-code offering. And that's why now we can see in 2019, Microsoft is right up there at the top with the other leaders. So the really good thing about that is that we, as developers using Power Apps, can benefit from all of that time and money that Microsoft is investing. So all this time I've been talking about Power Apps, but I want to put it into context. So Power Apps is actually part of the Power Platform, okay? And the Power Platform is really a bunch of related technologies that kind of support each other, and every solution that you make is going to be touching at least a few of these areas. So the Power Apps itself, that's kind of like, if you want to think about it in normal app terms, that's the UI, I guess. And then the common data service is the database. Okay, so that's where all the data that you have in your business is going to be sitting. Then we've got Flow. Does everyone here know Flow? Oh, a couple of hands up. Well, I'm actually a huge fan of Flow, so much so that I got my girlfriend to get this tattoo. Go with the flow. Very nice sentiment. And then, unfortunately, last year, Flow was actually renamed. Does anyone know what it was renamed to? It was renamed to Power Automate. So unfortunately, that tattoo doesn't have the same ring to it anymore. Go with the Power Automate. Not that cool. Anyway, so let's go back here and update our graph. It now says Power Automate. And the other big part of the Power Platform is Power BI. Now, I don't have to ask who knows about Power BI because I bet everyone does. And if you just do a Google Trends comparison, you can see Power BI by far outstrips all the other Power Platform components. But I will say, recently, in the last year or so, Power Automate and Power Apps are on an upward trend. And since I'm drawing similarities between Tesla and Power Apps, here's the Tesla share price. You'll notice it's on a very similar trajectory. Coincidence? I'll leave that up to you. So let's talk about the Power Platform. So obviously it's cloud-based. What that means is Microsoft is managing it for you. All the updates and whatever are going to be rolled out to your environment. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to have a system administrator kind of managing the servers or anything. It empowers you to make pretty complex solutions without any code at all. But like I mentioned before, my favorite feature of it is the fact that the out-of-the-box features that you build on top of really accelerate your development. And the other thing is you can extend it with custom code very easily. So there are so many opportunities that you have when you are designing your solution where you can actually integrate your own custom code. So much so that as a developer, it is more of a benefit than a hindrance. Like I said before, what I thought about low-code development doesn't really apply. And the other cool thing is you can integrate it with existing systems. So, I mean, if you do already have a legacy system in place and you want to start adding some Power Apps to it, you can start small, integrate with your existing system, and build on top of it later. So, that's enough about history. Let's talk about our scenario. So we've got Bob, the real estate agent. Now, this scenario is based on a true story. Someone who came to me asking for a software solution. So let's have a look. Firstly, he's got 10 employees, and he's looking to, obviously, as the owner of a real estate company, he's looking to get a system in place to manage all of his processes. So we're talking things like, processing applicants, managing the maintenance, repairs, after-hours support, advertising the properties that he has for rent, managing his inspections, and also processing all the paper forms that he is receiving. So, what kind of solution can we get for Bob? Well, he needs some sort of internal PRM dashboard, so to speak. That's XRM, but P for property. He needs some sort of tenant portal. So that's somewhere that his real estate tenants can log into, maybe to complain about a broken tap or whatever, and also possibly a chatbot that can give them information after hours. He needs a public website that he can advertise his properties that he has for rent on. He wants a mobile app, and I think this is a cool idea, by the way, a mobile app to manage his inspections. So if anyone here has experience renting a property, you'll know that periodically the agents like to come in and do a bit of an inspection. So they'll come through, maybe with a phone and snap some photos, make some notes. So basically this app is a way to automate that whole process. So when the agent comes along, they can say, okay, I'm inspecting this property now. They can take a few photos. Those photos are going to be saved directly into the system. And all that detail can then be used to generate a report, keep the landlord up to date, that sort of thing. The other thing that we can use here is AI. For example, reading application forms that Bob gets for tenants, and then pushing that into the system. And by the way, if you are interested in hearing more about processing forms, here's a blog post from my colleague JK. There's a handy QR code for you to scan if you're interested. So he shows you how you can get up and running with Azure Cognitive Services Form Recognizer, which is pretty cool. So anyway, back to Bob's scenario. First off, this is basically what I pitched to him. It's the dev solution. So we're going to use Angular or React for all of the web pages. So, the internal dashboard, the tenant portal, the other one. Then we're going to have a .NET Core API that is transferring the data in between. We're going to have a SQL database where we're storing all the property details. We're going to have Power BI managing all the reports. We're going to have Xamarin for the mobile app. And like I just said, with JK's form recognizer, we're going to use Cognitive Services to process the forms. So let's see what it looks like graphically. We've got our PRM internal there. So that's going to have our database on it. It's going to have the API, .NET Core. We're going to have the internal UI, Angular or React. We'll have data flowing back and forth through there. We've got our public website, Angular or React as well. We're going to have our forms coming in, being processed by Cognitive Services. We're going to have our mobile app, which is in Xamarin. Data going back and forth. We've got our tenant portal, Angular or React. We're going to have an Azure bot services. We're going to have AD B2C managing the authentication. So that's a lot of different parts there, a lot of different technologies. And basically, what I said to Bob was, this is just in terms of costing, it's an estimate. Obviously, we'll need to do a spec review to fully cost it more accurately, but you're looking at about $500,000 of development in that solution, just because of how complex all those different parts are. So Bob's reaction was, well, that's a little bit too high. My budget is, I'm just a small company, my budget isn't that big. Can you give me an alternative that's going to save some money? So I said, okay, well, let's talk about no-code solutions then. So the crux of the no-code solution is going to be Power Apps. So we're going to be using some different types of Power Apps for this. Things like a model-driven app for the internal data management, a Canvas app for the inspection mobile app. We're going to use Power Automate to manage all the business logic and integration with other systems. We'll have a Power Apps portal where the tenants can log in and raise their issues in that. And we'll also have a Power Virtual Agent, which is going to be the chatbot. Now, if you're not sure what any of those terms mean, that's fine. I'm about to explain, so don't worry. But just to visualize what it looks like, here's our internal PRM system. That's the Common Data Service. It's got Power Automate on it, which is handling all of the business logic and integrations. This is our PRM UI, so the internal management system. That's going to be a model-driven app in Power Apps with data going back and forth there. Our public website, that's going to be a Power Apps portal. Data going back and forth again. And here we're using Power Automate and AI Builder to process those forms that are coming in. We're going to have our mobile app, which is going to be a Canvas app in Power Apps, data flowing back and forth again. And finally, the tenant portal, that's another Power Apps portal. And we'll also have Power Virtual Agent as a chatbot on there. So you can see at a glance, it looks a lot simpler just because there's a lot less technologies involved. And my estimate to Bob was around $200,000. So obviously that doesn't include the ongoing licensing costs, and we'll cover that off in the pricing section. But at least in terms of the upfront time spent actually creating the solution, it's a lot faster. You know, it's less than half the time. So just in case you've been lost by all those Power Apps terms, I now want to do an unboxing, so to speak, as in what you get out of the box. So let me just bring up my window here. Here we go. So this is what it looks like when you first open Power Apps. You can see there I've just gone to make.powerapps.com, and basically you're going to do all of your development for Power Apps in the browser. Okay? So you can see here, this is the welcome screen. We can create apps from blank. There's a Canvas app, model-driven app portal. There's all the apps that I've already got. And I'll show you what the data looks like. So I've just gone here to data. I'll go to entities. So you might be thinking there's a lot of different entities here. The fact is that when you create a new environment in Power Apps, it actually gives you a lot of entities out of the box. So things like account, activity, address, appointment, all these are things that Microsoft provides you in the Common Data Service that will allow you to either build on top of them to customize, or you can also just create a new one. So creating new entities is as simple as pressing the plus button, typing in whatever details you need to on the form there, and then clicking done. So in this case, because Bob wanted a property management system, I've created a custom entity here for property. And I've also reused the contact entity. Oops. I've reused the contact entity. So this is one of the standard out-of-the-box entities. Contact basically just means a person. So it's got all their contact details. And I've reused that to represent tenants in this system, as in people who are renting properties. So if I go ahead and open up one of these entities, I'll open up property. So these are all the fields that we've got on property. A bunch of these fields, again, are created for you out of the box, things like created by, created on, modified by, modified on, that sort of thing. But I've added some specific fields for the custom entity. For example, the address of the property, latitude and longitude, postcode, suburb, that kind of thing. So those are all the fields. Adding fields, just as simple as creating entities. You just press the plus field button. You can type in the name. You can pick the data type. So I've got things like text, numbers, dates, and a bunch of other ones. And then once you're done, just click done, and then it gets added. So very easy experience creating entities, creating fields on the entities. The other thing that you're going to be doing is creating relationships. So relationships are very important in Power Apps because that's how you kind of link all of your data together. So if you've got an experience with SQL, you'll know about foreign keys. That's essentially what we're doing here. So we're saying, for example, I've created a relationship between the property and the contact. And it's a one-to-many relationship, which means that one property is related to one property is related to many contacts, basically. So one property can be rented by many people. And yeah, again, same experience with adding relationships. You just click, is it many to one, one to many to many, and then you just fill in a few fields, like what are you relating it to, and the name of the field, and that kind of thing. Very simple to set up. So once you've got a bunch of these entities in place, what you do then with it is to create a model-driven app. So a model-driven app it's something separate to the common data service. Okay, so the common data service is the database. If you think of it in SQL terms, it's all the different tables that you have. And a model-driven app is where you pick tables to surface and display to the user as they're using their model-driven app. Now, the way that I like to think about model-driven apps is they're data-oriented. So if your use case is you want to go in there and kind of look around at your data, look around at the various relationships and things like that, you want to use a model-driven app. And one other thing, just going back here, or two other things actually. Two other things that you put inside the model-driven app are views. So I'll just open up one of these views. This is the view for property. You can see here I've got a column for the name and a column for the created on date. So basically a view is a way of looking at a list of records of this entity. So basically we're going to this view and we want to look at a list of properties, right? And again, editing views is as simple as editing the entity itself. You just click on the field that you want to add. It adds it. You can drag and drop these to reorder them. You can also add sorting and filtering as well. So very easy to edit the views. Let's go back here. The other thing I wanted to show you is form. So whereas a view is displaying a list of entities, the form is displaying just one. So for example, if you're creating a new record of this entity or editing an existing one, you would look at the form in order to fill in all that data. And the same sort of experience as with editing the views. You've got all your fields down here on the left. You've got this design panel here in the middle. And you've got the ability to kind of drag and drop your fields in as you desire. So yes, another kind of no-code configuration setup for both the views and the forms. And yeah, so once you've created your forms and views, you just add whichever ones you want in here, which is the model-driven app. And I'll just quickly show you what it looks like if I hit play. So you can see here I'm looking at my list of properties. On the left-hand side, I've got this kind of navigation, which again is set up very easily without any code in the config. So I can like click on tenants, and then I'll see a list of tenants. Most of these are just automatically created. If I go to properties, and I might open 81 to 91 Military Road, and you can see down the bottom here, I've got a grid to show maybe some issues that tenants have raised. I'll get back to that later, by the way, and a list of tenants who are currently renting this property. So yeah, all that stuff is what is in the model-driven app. Now, on the other hand, the Canvas app. So whereas the model-driven app is data-oriented, the Canvas app is task-oriented. So basically, you're going to use a Canvas app anytime you've got a specific task that you're trying to do. In this case, obviously, the inspection. So unlike the model-driven app, which is very much a standardized UI that you just can kind of tweak what order the fields come in and all that kind of thing, in the Canvas app, you can actually get kind of pixel level customization. You can change colors, fonts, and yeah, you can interact with the phone's hardware. You can use it to make photos, save them back into the common data service, that kind of thing. And the other thing I wanted to show you is Power Automate. So, for example, here I've got a Power Automate for when a property is created. We're going to get the coordinates. So I'll quickly show you how it works. Basically, when a property is created in here, these latitude and longitude have to come from somewhere, right? It's not entered by the user. The user just enters the address, And then we use this Bing Maps connector, and we just chuck in all the address fields into their respective text boxes. And then when we get the result back, we get the latitude and longitude, and we just save them back against the record. So that's how these values here are coming through. And obviously those values are very important if you want to display your rental properties on some sort of map view, which is what Bob wants. Being a real estate agent, his favorite 3 words are location, location, and location. So let me jump back to my slides. So let me just take a sip of water here. All right, so let's have a look at some of that. Let's do a quick recap of what I just covered. First off, the common data service, right? So that is the PRM internal, the main database that is holding our entire solution together. So what do we know about CDS, or Common Data Service? It's the database. It's fully managed in the cloud. You just go to that URL and start developing. It's automatically backed up, which is a big plus. So if you do accidentally delete all your data, you can roll back. I think it's backed up every 30 minutes. So you're not going to lose a whole lot of data if you do make a big mistake. Like I showed you, there's no code setup. You can create all your entities, your fields, your relationships, and it's just a matter of clicking through these fields, clicking on these forms, filling in whatever detail. It's all pretty straightforward. There's the relationships. Here's the other big thing I want to tell you about is managing the schema changes. So we have this concept called a solution in Power Apps, and a solution is basically a bundle of related customizations or dependent customizations. And basically, if you've got 2 environments, which you probably will, for example, a UAT and a production environment, obviously you're going to be doing all your development on one of your environments. And then once you're ready to deploy to production, you're just going to bundle it all up as a solution, export it, and then import it into production, and then away you go with production. So that's how easy it is to export and import. There's just a couple of buttons on the top ribbon there. So just to underline that point, DevOps with CDS. So if you think about DevOps in SQL, whenever you make a change to the database, you're creating a SQL script. In Azure, whenever you are creating a new environment, you're making an ARM template that's going to allow you to rebuild the environment, make a new one as required. And in CDS, we have solutions, okay? So a solution just contains all the customizations that you've made to the schema. Obviously, the data itself is going to remain in its own environment. So all the data in UAT remains there, all the data in production remains there, but what we're transferring from one place to the other is the actual customization to the schema. And yeah, like I said, when you're ready to update production, you just import your solution. And then that's going to make all the changes as per a SQL script. So the important consequence of that is you can't rename your columns, you can't change your data types or anything like that. So you have to be very careful when you create fields that you use a good naming convention from the start. Obviously, you can change the labels that appear, but the actual code name that exists in the background, you can't change that. And one other important thing to note, when you're moving solutions from one environment to another, if you've got data that is like lookup data, like you might consider it configuration data rather than environment-specific data, then you want to make sure you migrate that data with the same GUIDs. So I won't get into it here, but there's this cool thing, you can Google it, called XRM Toolbox, and it has a data transporter plugin, which allows you to push records from one environment to another and retain all the GUIDs. So any references you have are going to remain the same. So for example, Bob might use that to, if he wanted to use the same properties in UAT and production, the same list of properties, he could just push that across. So back to here. The other cool thing about CDS is the audit history. So basically that means once enabled, you can see who made a change to any of those columns in the database, who made it, when did they make it, and what did they change it from, what did they change it to. So you've got a full history of every change. You've also got row level security, which means on a per record entity, so per record basis, you can manage the permissions of that record. So for example, if Bob wanted to open up another real estate agency in another city, he might want to kind of divide those two business units, so to speak, so people from one city can't see the other one's properties and vice versa, but he could still retain full visibility from the top. So that's all pretty simple to set up. Another cool feature that is a recent addition is the read-only SQL access. So if you do prefer to use SQL to look at your data and do reporting, you can connect straight to CDS using SQL Management Studio. So very, very good. So yeah, that's it for the Common Data Service. Next up, we've got the model-driven app. So if you remember from my demonstration, the model-driven app is the data-oriented view. It's the way you have a kind of overview of all of the data in your organization, all of the different relationships and columns and all of that. And in Bob's case, we're using that for the internal UI of his property management system. So what do you get in the box with model-driven app? First off, like I mentioned before, it's a standardized UI. So unlike the Canvas app, you're not able to change colors, change fonts, change pixel perfect orientation or anything. All you can really do is change the order of the fields and a few other little things like that. It's data oriented, as I mentioned. There's no code setup for the forms, the views, the sitemap, which is the navigation on the left. So like I showed you, that was the form designer, that was the view designer, and that's just showing you on the left-hand side there the navigation. The other cool thing about model-driven apps is it's easy to embed Canvas apps actually inside forms and also Power BI reports. So if you do have some cool Canvas apps or Power BI reports, very simple to just chuck them into the model-driven app form, and that can give you a better experience for your users. So here's an awesome example of a Power BI chart that I showed Bob. Obviously, since he cares about the location of his properties, this might be a way that he could represent his data. Obviously, something like that, you need a bit of experience with Power BI to pull it off. But as a smart guy, but not a technical guy, even something like this, he can create himself without any code. Basically, if you have the skill to create a complicated Excel spreadsheet, you probably have the skill to create this kind of Power BI report. So the other cool thing about model-driven apps is it's got all of the standard Dynamics features out of the box. So in case you didn't realize, Dynamics itself, all of the first-party Microsoft apps, they're actually built on top of model-driven apps. So there's a lot of synergy between them. All the things like lookups, filters, advanced find, quick create forms, workflows, all that kind of thing, you can get straight away with your model-driven app as well. So that is it for the model-driven app. Next up, we've got the Canvas app. So if you recall from the example, the Canvas app is what I suggested to Bob for his mobile app for managing the inspections. So it's that bit of the overall solution. So if you remember, the Canvas app is the custom UI, which means you've got a pixel perfect layout options. You can change all of your colors, all of your fonts. It's a designer's dream, sort of. I mean, having said that, it can be a little bit annoying to make it do exactly what you want. Obviously, if you were working in Xamarin, you'd have a lot more flexibility than using the Canvas app. It can be frustrating at times. But anyway, so yes, the Canvas app is task-oriented. So what that means is, as opposed to the model-driven app, which is data-oriented, the Canvas app you want to use for performing a specific task, right? So in this case, we're doing our inspection. And again, it's fully managed in the cloud with versioning. So what that means is you can work on your app, you can develop it, and when it's ready, you can update the version, and then all of your staff on their mobile devices are going to receive the update immediately, and they can start using it straight away. Now, that's an important point that I want to make about the Canvas app, is that it's only for internal people to your organization, right? So you can't share it to someone who isn't in your organization. So obviously, one of the limitations as opposed to a custom developed app. But yeah, again, no code required for the development. Basically, if you can create a complex Excel spreadsheet, you can create a Power App just fine. And that was what it looked like. One other note that I would make is that the Power Apps, when you're developing it, make sure you save it. It's caught me out a couple of times before where I've done a bunch of stuff and then forgotten to save it, and then close the window, and then I've lost all that work that I just did. So, some of these things, when you change them, the changes persist, and other things, you lose them if you don't press save. So that can be annoying. But yeah. So next up, we're going to look at the Power Automate. So the way to think about Power Automate is it's basically the glue of the system. It's what holds everything together. That's why I've highlighted all the red arrows coming out of our internal system here, because all those integrations are going to be managed by Power Automate. So, like I said, it used to be called Flow, which I think was a better name, but now it's called Power Automate. And it's a system glue. So if you've got any experience with, if this, then that, with Zapier, with Logic Apps, it's basically the same solution. There isn't really anything that it does that these other solutions don't offer. But the one big advantage, and why it's kind of the go-to solution for Power App development, is that it's included in the solution. So I mentioned before, the solution is the bundle of dependencies that you take from your development environment and push to production. So the really good thing about Power Automate is you can include these Power Automate flows in your solution when you're doing development, and then when you push the solution to production, they're going to work straight away. So you don't have to go in there and change any configuration or anything like that. It's going to work as soon as you publish. The other cool thing about Power Automate, why it's relevant for Power App development, is when you purchase your Power App licenses, you're going to get thousands of free runs of Power Automate included in those licenses. So the specifics we'll get to later when I look at the pricing, but yeah, that's a reason why you want to be using Power Automate. And if you've never seen Power Automate before, it's very easy to rerun if there was an error. If you've got a bug in your logic or whatever, you see a failed run, you can go in there, see what the error was, you can fix what was wrong with your Power Automate, and then you can just resubmit the failed run, and that'll mean that you won't lose any information. And again, hundreds of connectors are available. So like I showed you with the Bing Map connector, that's just one of the out-of-the-box connectors that you've got. So you can just go in there, search for a connector that you want, and assuming it exists, you can pick it, and then you just plug in whatever your inputs are, and then you get the outputs out the other end. But just in case they don't have a connector available, you can also create custom connectors pretty easily with Swagger. So you can go into like Postman, you can find all the API requests that you want to use, and you can export a Swagger file and import it into Power Automate and create a custom connector based on that. Or if you're a bit more lazy, you can just use a plain old HTTP request and just type in the URL that you want to hit. And yeah, that's pretty easy too. Another new thing that we've got in Power Automate is the UI flows. So what this is if there isn't an API that's readily available, you can actually use UI flows to automate a series of mouse clicks and data entry into a web page, right? So I haven't really had a chance to play around with it too much myself, but that's kind of cool, I guess, although I'm not sure if I want to rely on that for a serious production solution, because all it takes is a couple of changes on the web page and it probably won't work anymore. Anyway, here's an example of a flow. This one specifically is generating a report for Bob after his agents have completed an inspection. So I just wanted to give a couple of tips for the best way to lay out or structure your flows. So you can see up the top here, we've got a section where we're just composing data. So you can see up here, when the inspection is complete, we're going to get the related inspection items. We're going to create an array. And then for each inspection item, we're getting a related image from the blob storage. So by the way, that's where the Canvas app has saved the image that was taken from the agent's phone. And then we're just creating an array with that. So what we're doing in all these steps here is preparing input data that's going to go into our report creation. Okay? So the actual creation of the report itself takes place here in the processing step. And I've used an Azure function to do this. So if what you're doing is simple, you can probably get away with doing it in a flow step itself. But if you're doing anything more complicated, for example, creating a report, you probably want to use Azure functions to do it. It's a lot easier. And then once we've got our report back from the Azure function, we're just emailing the report to the agent, and we're marking the inspection as complete down the bottom there. So the thing to note about this is we've got 3 discrete steps. We've got input, processing, and output. So if what you're trying to do with your flow needs, for example, 2 processing steps, or maybe after processing you need to get some more input from somewhere else, what I would recommend is you actually break that into 2 separate flows, or 2 separate Power Automates. So you don't want to be flipping back and forth between this simple 3-step design structure. For the same reason that when you're developing code, each function that you've got in your code, it's only doing one thing, right? And that's really good both for trying to track down bugs if something went wrong, but also for reusing. So if you've got these small modular Power Automates and you want to reuse one of those little bits without having to copy and paste all the specific steps into another flow, you can just call your flow. One of the triggers they have is the HTTP request, which means all you do is send a HTTP request to a certain endpoint, and you can trigger a flow like that. So I would definitely recommend breaking your flows down so that they look like this one here. Now another tip for developing Power Automates is using the correct Common Data Service connector. So when I go into Power Automate and I type in Common Data Service because I want to get some data out of my Common Data Service, there are 2 options here. You can see we've got Common Data Service on the left and Common Data Service ... on the right, number 1 and number 2. So who here would use number 1 if they were trying to connect to their Common Data Service? Okay, we've got a couple of people there. Who would use number 2? All right, no one would use number 2. Interesting. So, in actual fact, you want to use number 2. Okay, so the reason for that is number 2 is actually Common Data Service current environment. And what that means is it is normally with the Common Data Service on the left, you need to specify what environment you're connecting to. And when you move the environment from one to another, you're going to have to go in there and update references to your environment. And that's something you don't want to do when you're deploying a solution. You want it to just work straight off the bat. So that's why the current environment common data service is the preferred connector, because when you use that, as soon as you have published your solution, it's going to work straight away, and you don't have to go in there and change any of the configuration. So a suggestion to Microsoft would be to make that differentiation more obvious between the two, because if you do get caught in the trap of using the wrong one, you'll need to go in there and strip it all out and replace it. So let's move on now to the Power Apps portal. So the Power Apps portal is what we're using for both the public website and also for the authenticated tenants portal. So what's really cool about the Power Apps portal? First off, obviously it's no code. It's a no-code portal, but the cool thing is you actually configure the Power Apps portal inside Power Apps. So when you create a Power Apps portal, you get a model-driven app that you use to configure all of the pages on the portal, all of the lists and views and forms. All that kind of stuff is actually configured via a model-driven app. So yeah, it's a public or authenticated site, either way, and it's displaying data from your common data service. Now, it is customizable, but only really in ways that Microsoft want you to be. So it's not like you can go in there and create a completely customized website. Okay, there are certain dimensions of customization that you can make, but if you want to kind of veer off any of those provided paths, it's probably a lot easier to just learn HTML and CSS and that sort of stuff. So yeah, let me show you the Power Apps portal. I think it's one of the cooler things that we have available in Power Apps. So this is what Bob's Power Apps portal looks like. Obviously, I haven't done much change from the default there, but the thing I wanted to show you is the map view. So you saw earlier how I set up the latitude and longitude, and that was so that I could get Bob's properties to show up on a map. So if I search for Sydney in this box, then I get this result here, and that's actually coming straight from the common data service. So this property, the latitude and longitude is plotted on this map, and yeah, it's showing the properties within 5 kilometers of what I searched. So that's pretty cool. And that was very, very simple to set up. But if you wanted to change this page very much away from what you get out of the box, it would be pretty difficult. So I'll show you what it looks like behind the scenes. Like I mentioned before, you actually get a model-driven app here called Portal Management. See there, it's model-driven. So that's what you use to actually configure your portal. And here is the setup page for the map view. You can see all you have to do is enter things like which field do you use for latitude, longitude, which field do you display in the various places. There's our Bing Maps. And yeah, all that stuff, once you've set it up, it's going to come through like that pretty easily. The other things that you do inside this portal management app, you can do things like creating forms, managing the contacts. So that's for the authenticated users, like the tenants. You can manage them, manage their passwords, all that kind of thing. Yeah, so that's all pretty cool. We've got calendar views as well, and just basic lists. So yes, that is all there. So just a quick recap on that. That was creating the list. By the way, I could go very much in depth with all the stuff that you can do in the Power Apps portal, but then it would probably take another 2 hours. So I won't do that just now. And yeah, that was the map view at the end. So the other thing I wanted to quickly brush over was the Power Virtual Agents. So that is the chatbot that's going to be sitting on the tenant portal. So Power Virtual Agents, it's a no-code chatbot. It's very easy to embed in your website. So it's basically just an iframe that you can copy and paste into your website. It doesn't even need to be a Power Apps portal. You can put it in any website. You can use it to leverage all the data in your CDS. So if you want to ask a question about the data that's in the common data service, you can get the bot to answer. For example, I might say, show me the properties in Sydney. And then the bot could look up the common data service, get all the properties in Sydney, and then reply them in the chat box, which is pretty cool. The other thing you can do with Power Virtual Agents is you can launch Power Automate functions. So you might say, hey, generate me a report from the most recent inspection, something like that. You can go ahead and generate that and email it through to you. The other cool thing about it is the single sign-on compatible authentication. So if you do have an authenticated portal, the bot can actually detect who it is that's currently signed in, and it can kind of cater the functionality that it delivers based on that. So it knows who you are, and it can get your data that you're asking for. And the final cool thing about it is you can escalate to a live agent. So if maybe the person who's talking to the chatbot says, hey, I want to talk to a real person, or if whatever they're asking for can't be answered because it's not set up, then you can just say escalate to a live agent, and then you can have a real person who actually receives the messages after that. So that's what the Power Virtual Agents screen looks like. There's a very basic example there. I put in I need a plumber, and it's replied with some emergency after hours contact numbers. Again, I could go more in depth on this, but it would probably be another 2 hours as well. Yes. So next up, we have the AI Builder. So that was for processing the application forms that are coming in. You can see there we've got both Power Automate and AI Builder, again, because Power Automate is our system glue. So AI Builder is basically no-code AI. It's very easy to integrate it with the common data service. So for example, in Bob's case, we might be reading what someone's written on a form and putting it into an entity or a record of an entity in common data service. It could also do other cool things like language, topic, and sentiment detection. And yeah, this is what the screen looks like. Again, I'm not going to go too far in depth with it, but you can see some other cool things you can do there as well, like object detection in photos, predicting whether or not a certain outcome will happen based on the data that you might have in a certain record, things like that. And the final thing that I want to say that's in the box is the extensions to existing Microsoft solution functionality. So this is probably one of the underappreciated pieces of Power Apps, is that if you've got things like Teams, SharePoint, Dynamics, Active Directory, all these kinds of things, you can get some synergy by using Power Apps. For example, you can embed Canvas apps inside a tab in Teams. You can use all your SharePoint data in all those Power Automates. Like I said before, Dynamics is actually built on top of model-driven apps, and Active Directory, all of your users are signing in with the same accounts in Power Apps. Okay, so let's move on to pricing. Now, before I actually cover the exact numbers, I want to remind you about what Power Apps actually saves you. Okay, so there was this study in 2018 by Forrester who found that 70% of development time was saved by using Power Apps. It also saved 38% of ongoing maintenance time. It had a return on investment of 362% over 3 years, and it paid for itself within 3 months. So that's something that I want you to keep in mind, is that even though these solutions cost money, obviously all the licensing and all those kinds of fees, even though you're paying money ongoing on a monthly basis, what you're saving is all the effort up front to actually implement the solution in the first place. All right? So the first bit of pricing we need to look at is the actual Power Apps licenses. So these are the 2 different licenses that we have available. There's the single app license and the unlimited app license. So the single app license allows a single user to use, I believe it's 2 apps that you pick that they can use. They can be either model-driven apps or Canvas apps. And the other license is the unlimited apps. So that means this user can use any apps at all in the whole organization. So looking at the annual pricing, we've got $165 a year for the single app license and $659 for the unlimited apps license. So you might be thinking at this point, well, all right, that means that the minimum cost to implement the most basic model-driven app is probably going to be $165 a year. But if you actually go and read into the fine print, you'll find that there is another difference between those 2 licenses, right? So in the per user, in the license for unlimited apps, which is called the per user license, you actually get, with your first user, 10 gigabytes of database capacity, okay? Whereas if you just got a single per app license, which was the cheaper one, you only get 1 gigabyte of database capacity. So the other thing you need to know is that each gigabyte of database capacity costs $55 a month. In other words, $660 a year. So who thinks that's a fair price for storing a gigabyte of data for a month? Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. So, if you've got 10 gigabytes, that is going to add up very, very quickly to $6,500 a year. So really what you want to do is get a user license, okay? The more expensive one, at least one, because the first one you get, you're going to get 10 gigabytes of database capacity. And then after that, you can just get your app licenses for every other user. Now, maybe if you've got around 20, 30, 40 users, maybe you don't need that 10 gigabytes for the user license, but that's something that you can think about later on. So for Bob's specific purpose, we're getting 1 user license, so we can get our 10 gigabytes of database capacity. We're getting 9 app licenses. If you remember, he's got 10 employees. And that total is going to come to $2,172 a year. So it's not breaking the bank, but Bob wants to try it out before committing. Okay? And this is something that I want to introduce to everyone who's watching this as well, is the Power Apps Community Plan. So this is a free development environment that you can use. Now, put free with an asterisk because it's not a complete environment. There are a few pretty tight limitations on what you can do. So for example, there's, I believe, a 250 megabyte limit on the database capacity. There's only 1 user can actually use it, so you can't have multiple users. And I think you only get 750 Power Automate runs per month. So it's pretty restrictive, but it's definitely cool for trying it out. So you can actually go get yours right now. There's the link and the handy QR code if you want to go ahead and scan that. And as I said before with the solutions, you can develop a whole solution on there, and when you're ready to put it into production, you can just export it from your community plan environment and import it into your production environment. So another suggestion for Microsoft in the area of database capacity. So you can see here, this is a screenshot of an environment that's just been deployed. And what you'll notice is the database usage is already 3.5 gigabytes, right? So remember how I told you get 10 gigabytes for your per user plan for the first one, and you get 1 gigabyte for your per app plan for your first one. So this is why you want to get the 10 gigabytes, because before you've actually added any of your own data to this, it's already taking up 3.5 gigabytes, and that's data that you can't delete because it's just system data, right? So the suggestion for Microsoft is I should only be paying for my own data and not the system data that I have no control over, especially when it costs so much money for a single gigabyte, $660 a year. So that's the licensing for the users in Power Apps. But the other thing I want to cover is the optional extras. So that's things like the Power Virtual Agents, the AI Builder, and the Power Apps Portal. So all these things are things that you don't get with those user licenses. They're things that you pay for in addition. Okay? So they're extra cost in addition to the Power Apps licenses. And I think when you're starting to use these, you're starting to pay a premium for sticking to no-code solutions. And it might be time to start thinking about if it's worth finding a developer to create a code solution for you instead. And you'll see why in a second. So the Power Virtual Agents pricing, $1,000 US a month. That's 1,440 Australian dollars a month, or 17,280 Australian dollars a year. So that is for having that bot on your site. You can see there in the image, it's per month for 2,000 sessions. So it's not like you pay. It's not like a pay-as-you-go system where however many sessions you had last month, you get the bill for it in the next month. What you need to do is before the month starts, you pre-purchase an amount of sessions that you want your bot to be answering in the coming month. And any sessions that are not used, they don't roll over to the next month. They're just lost. So yeah, it's pretty expensive. I'm going to say it's best value if you have a multiple of 2,000 monthly requests, because obviously if you don't have a multiple of 2,000 monthly requests, you're paying for a bunch of monthly requests that are not going to be used. Now, even if you do, it's still super expensive. So it's not something that I'd recommend, especially if you've got a small website without much traffic. It probably isn't worth $17,000 a year just to have a bot running on your website. And there are definitely cheaper options out there. For example, here's another handy QR code for the Microsoft Bot Framework Composer. If you do want to get your hands dirty with a bit of code, it's very easy to set up your own bot and save a lot of money by writing a little bit of code. Next up, we've got the AI Builder. So you can see here $686 a month. Now that is for a unit which consists of 1 million service credits. So I'm not really sure what that means. It's kind of a bit vague as to what a service credit is. They have this AI Builder calculator though, which you can use to tell it what you want to use it for. And it's going to tell you how much it's going to cost. Now this number is quoted in US dollars. That was, I told it I want to process 500 forms per month, and it's told me the monthly fee, 500 US dollars, or in other words, 8,238 Australian dollars per year. So another thing that I wanted to point out is there are cheaper ways of doing this. For example, the Cognitive Services Form Recognizer API. Now this is the thing that I showed you JK's blog about earlier. It's actually free for the first 500 monthly page processes. So you can save $8,000 just by, again, getting your hands dirty. And I actually asked JK, how long do you think it would take to set up one of these form recognizer APIs to process a new form? And he said it's probably about a day all up. So if you think about it, a day of JK's time is very quickly, the monthly cost of running the AI Builder is going to very quickly catch up to the cost of hiring JK for 1 day. So yes, AI Builder. Another issue, like I said with the Power Virtual Agent, there's no pay-as-you-go option. You need to pre-commit. So I need to tell it, okay, I want to process 500 forms per month before I actually do it. And at the end of the month, if I don't process that many forms, it doesn't roll over. So I've lost whatever I buy that I don't use. There's also this kind of unclear service credit system. You need to kind of use that calculator to find out how much you're actually going to be using. And like I said, with the Azure Cognitive Services Form Recognizer, there are definitely cheaper options available as well. All right, and the last thing to talk about pricing is the Power Apps portal. So you'll notice there are two different options for the pricing. That's for the authenticated users and the unauthenticated users. Now, the weird thing about the authenticated users is you're not actually paying for like monthly active users. What you're paying for is daily login sessions. So a daily login session is defined as a period of 24 hours in which a user has logged in, right? So if they log in once today at midday and then again today at 6 p.m., that's one daily login session. But if they log in today at midday and then tomorrow at midday, that's two daily login sessions. So you can imagine if you had like, I don't know, 100 users and they logged in every day of the month, well, that's 3,000 daily login sessions. And since it's costing $274 a month for just 100 daily login sessions, you can imagine 3,000 is going to be pretty expensive. I will note the price does scale with usage, so you can, as you buy more and more, it does drop per unit, but you know, it's still going to be expensive. So yeah, the 274 translates to 3,295 per year. That's just for 100 daily login sessions per month, by the way. On the other hand, the unauthenticated views, I think that's a bit more reasonable. So that is just over $1,500 a year, and that gives you 100,000 unauthenticated views per month. So what I'm saying about that is the unauthenticated page views may be good value if you have a multiple of 100,000 monthly page views. So again, if your site isn't getting very much traffic, you know, maybe just a couple of visits a day, you're not going to need anywhere near 100,000 monthly page views, but you need to pay for it because that's the minimum amount that you can buy, right? So it probably isn't good value if your site isn't being, you know, it doesn't have much traffic. What I think is the 100 daily login sessions is not really very good because what it encourages you is to make a portal that your users don't want to log in and use, right? Because the more they actually log in, the more you have to pay. So if I was using one of these, I'd make my portal as useless as possible so that people don't log in and use it. So what I think is maybe if you divide the cost by 10 and make it pay as you go instead of a pre-commitment that doesn't roll over, then it might be good value. All right, so that's enough for pricing. Now I'm going to compare the Power Apps solution with the Dev solution. So first off, I'm sure everyone watching this right now is fully aware of Scrum. What we do in Scrum is first we build the backlog, then we plan what we want to do in a certain sprint, then we actually do the sprint, and then we do our sprint review where we see, okay, what have we completed in this sprint, and then we kind of plan for the next sprint. And that's how you approach development, which allows you to kind of change your goals as you're developing, because that's the way that we develop things. So what I think about Power Apps is it can really be used in conjunction with Scrum and in a really good way as well. So first thing I'll say about Power Apps is day one MVP. It might be a little bit controversial, but I think it's definitely possible to get an MVP up and running in just one day. Obviously, you need to be careful about defining your scope. It's going to be a very narrow scope. It's going to be a very simple solution, but the crucial thing is that since you're building on top of all these production-ready, out-of-the-box components, all it takes is a little bit of tweaking to the specific business requirements, and you've got a production-ready MVP solution. It might just be a couple of entities, a couple of views, a couple of forms, and maybe 1 or 2 Power Automates, but it's going to be ready for production usage, which is really cool. And the reason why it's cool is there's minimum risk involved, okay? So normally when you're developing things, first you gather all the requirements, then you go away and build it, and then you kind of come back to the product owner and you say, okay, this is what we've got, what do you think? You can gather feedback. But the cool thing about the Power Apps is that the product owner can be involved throughout, right? So because you can develop things without any code, things like changing fields that appear on forms, or changing views, or changing basic layout of a Canvas app, things like that, they can all be done by the product owner. They don't need to ask a developer to make all these minor changes, and that can really save a lot of time. And the other thing is that development is never really locked down, okay? So normally when you create a solution and you're gathering feedback from the product owner, you need to kind of stop developing and give them a chance to review what you've got and give you a bunch of feedback and things that they want changed. But with Power Apps, because they can be involved throughout, they can constantly be making these changes as they go. So it's a lot faster process. Okay? And the other thing I've said is change your mind, no problem, right? So if you do something a certain way and then change your mind about it, it's pretty easy to just take out what you did and replace it with something else. Now, put an asterisk there because you do want to catch your mistakes early, especially since it's a no-code development environment. It can be easy for someone non-technical to come in and do something that maybe isn't the smartest decision. And if they do that early in the project and then you develop weeks of dependencies on top of it, it can be very, very expensive to go back and try and change it and change everything else that was built on top of it. So that is something that you need to be aware of and be careful of. So let's now calculate Bob's total cost for the Power App solution. So like I said before, there's about $2,000 a year from the Power Apps licenses. That was one user license and 9 app licenses. The Power Apps portal, so he's got the minimum of 100,000 monthly page views. That's $1,500. He's got the authenticated portal, $3,295. That was for the 100 daily login sessions. In real life, it would probably be more than that because you'd probably have more than 100 logins in a given month. For the AI builder, he's got $8,238 a year. And for the Power Virtual Agent, he's got just over $17,000. So if we go ahead and add all of that up, it comes out to a total of $32,638. So yes, we saved a lot of money by doing the Power App solution. If you remember, I said right up the top, my very vague estimates were the development solution is going to be about $500,000, the Power App solution about $200,000. So yes, we saved a lot of money there, but we've got quite a high yearly bill, $32,000. So maybe 9 or 10 years after implementing this system, we're going to end up behind where we would have been with the development solution. So obviously when Bob heard that, he wasn't very happy. He doesn't want to be paying $30,000 a year for all these licensing costs. So he said, Calum, what can you do to make the bill a little bit cheaper for me? And that's where I introduced the best of both worlds and what I'm calling the alternative portal. So all those optional extras that we added in like the Power Apps portal, the Power Virtual Agent, the AI Builder, all those things, you're paying a premium for enjoying the no-code development experience. And you don't really have to. If you know anything about developing, for example, we can replace the Power Apps portal with a Blazor app, which is free to start. Obviously, once you start getting some heavier load on it, you'll need to start paying for the server, but it's not going to be anywhere near as much as it costs for the Power Apps portal. We can use Azure AD B2C, which is free for up to 50,000 monthly active users. So we're no longer paying for the no longer paying per login session, which was the annoying thing about Power Apps portals. We're going to use Power Automate and Azure Functions to do all of our stuff, which is free-ish. There's a very generous free allocation, and then after that, you're going to be paying a couple of cents, not very much. And we're going to keep using the Power Apps for the user licensing. Obviously, it's already paid for, and it was, what, $2,000 thereabouts a year. So that is what we're going to reduce our payment to. So just to review, this was everything that we were paying for in the Power Apps solution. Now for the hybrid solution, we're taking out those Power Apps portals and we're replacing them with Blazor apps, which are free to start with, and also the AD B2C. There we go, $0 a year. We're taking out the AI Builder. We're putting in cognitive services, which is also free, up to $500 per month. And then we're taking out the Power Virtual Agent, which was the big cost. And we're putting in Azure bot services, which are also free, at least to start with. So how are we going to make this work? Well, first, we're going to set up an Azure AD B2C tenant. So I'm not going to go into all the details here, but if you want to see a good talk by my colleague Matt Goldman, there's a handy QR code for you to scan of how to set up a B2C tenant and the things you can do with it. But basically what you're going to add is some user flows and an app registration. So the user flows are the things like the sign up, sign in, change password, all that kind of basic stuff. And we're going to register our app. So then we're going to set up the Power Platform to have this custom portal. So what do we have to do? Since we're no longer using our Power Apps portal to manage the user authentication, we're now using AD B2C to manage it. So we need to add a field on an entity in the Power Platform to store the B2C ID. Okay? So the entity that I'm using is the contact, because each contact in our common data service is a tenant, and each tenant is going to be logging in to our portal. So basically, we're going to have a field next to each tenant that's going to tell us which B2C user this tenant is, effectively. Then we're going to add Power Automate, and I'll show you how that works right now. Okay, so this is our first Power Automate here. So this is when a contact is created, create a B2C user. So I'll show you how it works. Basically, when the contact is created, we're going to get an access token for the Microsoft Graph API, and then we're going to use it to create a new user in our B2C tenant. You can see there we're using the name of the contact, the email address of the contact, and the first name and last name. Now for now, I'm just giving it the password of password123. Obviously, in real life, there are much more secure ways of managing this, but again, this is just a day one MVP, so I wasn't too worried about that. And then once we've created our new user, we're going to get the ID that B2C gives us, and we're going to save it back in this field here, the identity provider ID, which is the new field that I added to save which B2C user this contact points to. Okay. Now that we've got the B2C user creation ready, there are a couple of other things we need to do as well. So firstly, we're going to get related properties. Okay. So if you think about what is our portal going to do once a user signs in, right? So we want to know who the user is, then we're going to get the property that they're a tenant of, and then we're going to return those details to display on the portal. So I'll show you what this flow does. Firstly, what we pass into this flow is a user ID. So that user ID is coming from the authenticated JWT that we've got in the Blazor app. And we're finding the user with the matching user ID from that. And then we're getting the related property to that user. So that's all pretty straightforward. We're just finding which property belongs to this user's ID, and then we're returning it. So that's going to be the API that the portal uses to get the data to display. And then the other thing that we want to do with the portal is to have the ability to post a new issue. So this is where a tenant can go in and say, hey, my tap's broken, please fix it, or whatever. So we're following a similar process here. We're getting a contact with a matching ID, and then we're finding the related property, and then we're creating a new issue with the inputs that they provide, so a name and a description of the issue, and also we're relating it to a property and a tenant. Okay, so yeah, that's all the setup that we have to do for the Power Platform, and I'll show you what it looks like in a minute. But first, I'll just run through here. So yeah, we've got 3 Power Automates. When a contact is created, add a user to B2C, just like that. And then we're getting the ID back from B2C, saving it in the common data service. Next, when there's an HTTP request, we know who is making the request, and we get the property that is related to them, just like that. And then finally, when they create a new issue, we want to insert data based on whatever they've input into the portal, like that. So for the portal, we're going to create a Blazor app, and it's very easy to, if you've got Visual Studio 2019, you can just click Create New Blazor App. You can click Use AD B2C. So if you've already set that up, you just need to put a couple of bits into the form and then click Create, and then it's going to set up all the groundwork for you. Okay, and then you just need to create a couple of services to use the Power Automate endpoints that you've already set up, and then you need to create a very simple view for the input and output. So this is what the new Blazor app looks like. So we've just selected Blazor Server App. We've gone in here and said individual user accounts, AD B2C application, and then you just put in the other details that you get from there. And now I'll show you what the portal looks like. So this is my code here. Let me just jump over to the property service. So this is the code that is getting the property data for an authenticated user. And you can see here, we're just calling the endpoint. That's the endpoint for the HTTP trigger flow. And we're just adding on the user ID, which we're getting from the authenticated user token here. And so once we pass that into the Power Automate, it's going to find the related property and return it. So I'll go ahead and run this right now, and I'll show you. Okay, so I first come here, it tells me to log in. So I hit login. All right, I'm going to sign in with this account here. So let me jump back to the portal for a second, and I'll show you why I'm signing in with this account. So if you remember before, this was my property form, and down here I've got a list of tenants, okay? And my tenant for this property, 81 to 91 Military Road, is called Calum Test. So if I expand this, you can see the email is a@calum.world, and the identity provider ID is this. So this is actually matching up to a user in AD B2C. So now when I go back here and sign in, it's going to log in with that B2C user, and then it's going to hit that Power Automate that I showed you before. It's going to send in this ID from Blazor, and then it's going to return this property to the front end. And just to prove they are connected, I can come in here and just quickly update this. So I might update that to 80 and click Save. And then if I come back here and refresh this page, there you go. Now it says 80. So that proves that it's coming through live from CDS. Now I might create an issue here. I might say, tap's broken. And I might say, please fix ASAP. And I'll submit that. And now when I jump back to the model-driven app here, and I can just refresh this grid. And there we go. So that's come through. Tap's broken. Please fix ASAP. So that was all very, very simple to set up. Even though there was a bit of code involved, I'd say it was pretty much just as easy as setting up the Power Apps portal. And the main advantage is all that money that we're going to save. So just going back to the slides here. So in summary, good points of Power Apps. We're building on top of so many out-of-the-box features. I think, again, that's the main point that I want to drive home here is it's so fast to get started with a production-ready solution. And that, I think, is the main advantage of using Power Apps. Okay? There's a minimized gap between idea and solution. So what do I mean by that? Basically, designing a solution is creating a solution. So there's basically no difference between laying out what all your entities are, what all the data is, and what they do. And once you've done that, you've basically already got your solution. There's no additional step where you have to go and code it all up. The other thing, obviously, since it's no code, domain experts can design the Power Apps. It's not just the IT experts who are doing that. And another one of my favorite points, it's very simple to add custom code like I just showed you to save a lot of money, particularly on those optional extras. The less good points about it, obviously it's never going to be as flexible as a custom build. Okay? There are a lot of things that you can't do in Power Apps that you can do if you just create a custom website completely on your own. There's increased risk of bad design haunting you forever. So, I mean, this is a risk of having non-technical people try to create complex solutions is they might make some mistakes, and if you build dependencies on top of that, it can become very, very expensive to go in there and fix it. So again, you need to be careful about that. Another less good point is kind of obvious. You're locked into using Microsoft's Power Platform. Okay, so you never really have complete ownership over your solution. It's always your solution that's on Microsoft's Power Platform. The other thing, obviously, the ongoing subscription fees kind of follows on from that. So you're going to be paying subscription fees for as long as you're running your solution, okay? And the extra add-ons are pretty expensive, as I showed you. And the final thing to remember is the Lamborghini eventually catches the Tesla, right? So ultimately, I think if what you're developing is a large-scale software solution that you're planning to license out to hundreds of other companies and turn into this huge thing, then you probably want to be using a custom development or traditional development instead of Power Apps, okay? That is the Lamborghini, right? The traditional development. If, though, all you're doing is trying to solve a technical problem that only applies to your company, then that's the Tesla solution, and I think that makes a lot of sense. So hopefully today I've showed you what you can do with Power Apps, maybe given you some ideas of how you could implement it in your own company, and thank you. If you did download the SSW app at the start, you can go ahead and scan this QR code here. You'll get 500 bonus points for watching the talk. I'll give you a couple of seconds to do that. And finally, if you've got any feedback, you can go ahead and scan this QR code, and that'll take you to a Microsoft form where you can give your feedback. All right, so do we have any questions?
Hello, yeah, there's some questions from some online audience. Let me just get them for you.
Sure.
So, can Power Apps be used by non-developer business people / founders? If it still requires a dev, then how much build cost is really reduced?
So can Power Apps be used by non-technical people?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So the point that I was trying to make by saying you need to be careful is that if you do make a design choice that is a bad one, it could cost you a lot of money if you start building dependencies on top of it, right? But if you're kind of smart about what you're doing and you do enough research into what you're doing, I think absolutely you can create a complex solution without having to get a developer involved. Absolutely. Next question.
Yep, that was from Pratik, I think is the name.
Okay.
So he's got another one. Let me just see. So this one, someone else has already in the chat answered it, but I'll see what you say as well. Is there any payment gateway built into Power Apps?
No, not built in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
but it's easy to integrate with payment gateways.
Okay. Another thing from Andre. Wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
And Francis is asking, can we have the QR code up again?
Which one? This one? The 500 point one?
Yeah, and it's up.
All right, there you go.
Great. And Andre says again, I'm looking forward to using my new knowledge to build new projects with Power Platform.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do with it.